You seeing that?
I see your PowerPoint.
Very good. All right.
Ready to go?
Yeah, ready to go.
Okay. Well, everybody, welcome to our final installment of Exit Planning 101, understanding the what, why, and how of building a successful comprehensive exit plan. Today's session is going to be on the sellable company, and Corby McGordon is going to walk us through the materials. When we, as we go through this session, don't think of it only in terms of important for someone who is going to sell their company like to a third party, type transaction. Last session, we talked about the different exit paths, and what Corby's going to be discussing is very applicable to every situation. In fact, even if you don't plan on ever exiting, if you implement any of the suggestions that we've been making over the last few months, you're going to have a business that's more enjoyable to run, more profitable, a better place to work from an employee standpoint. So, like I think we've said this a number of times, but these presentations have been in the context of exit planning, but pretty much everything we've discussed is really focused on making your business one that is profitable and efficient and just great so that someone else would love to buy it. And that's what Corby's going to focus on today. So with that, Corby, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Walter. Yeah, I think that's well said that, exit planning is just good business planning. And the addition to business planning and the differentiation actually is this three legs of the stool idea that the wealth planning aspect and the personal life after business aspect are woven into it. But they are all very much interrelated and always have been. We're just always not aware of that as business owners because we tend to live in that business bubble. Okay. So with that, we'll jump in. Valuable versus sellable. And a lot of times in exit planning, you hear the term value creation and value drivers. Well, value does not equal sellable. And here's why. Valuable by definition is it's worth a good price. Sellable is it's fit to be offered for sale. And I listed some bullets here, but let's face it, when we get a valuation of a company, to a degree, it's hypothetical. It's a mathematical exercise, a willing buyer, willing seller in a market that is assessed to a degree, but it isn't that real buyer with real money coming in and taking a hard look at what do I got and making a decision amongst all the other options. Do I actually want to buy this particular company? So it's based on both math and the value drivers, and it's a very detailed assessment of the asset. And it's also market driven by the market today, the market du jour, and take that broad definition of marketing. So I don't know actually if this is my quote or someone else's, but at the bottom, a small business that's provided income to an owner, service to clients, and employment to people is extremely valuable, but it may be difficult to sell. And so why would that be? Well, here's an example. Say hypothetically you had a money machine, and it would be an extremely valuable asset theoretically on the surface. But what if it required these things? You had to operate it. The process to run it was in your head. It only printed Kohl's dollars or some other vendor's dollars. Output was limited and there was no way to increase it. Could you sell it? Well, the answer is probably you could possibly sell it and get somebody to buy it, but it's very limited in the market and it's very limited the price you'd get. So that said, then, the gears of a sellable business are really the ones we just enumerated. It is the team, it's the processes, the customers / market, cash flow and growth potential, and they all interplay. Even listing them out can kind of intellectually throw you off in that. So I actually use the term gears because they all work together and they all interact with one another. So, as Walter said in the intro, if you just do one or two of these things, you'll have a better operating business. Therefore, hopefully more enjoyable, more efficient, and also at some point more sellable than it was at least. So again, it's something really to pound home. And even as Lisa talked, in a previous session on wealth planning and planning for the future, what we want to do is just realistically plan. There's nothing wrong with not having a sellable business. When you get right down to it, a lifestyle business is just that. It's going to provide for a lifestyle, but it requires different approaches to planning than a business that is actually going to be sold. So let's jump into each of these categories real quick. The team versus owner centricity. And the diagram here kind of says it all that owners are often just at the hub of everything. By definition, you start the business, you know how it runs, you make the decisions, you make the best decisions. You're in 100% control, and that's a necessity in the beginning. The problem is, as things grow, many owners stay there, and they're actually, in some cases, we've run into owners that are actually proud of, yep, I'm in charge of everything, and that's a heart stopper. It's like, well, you got to change that, because the problem, one, it's common, but two, it requires you to operate it, and a buyer needs you to own and run the machine, and therefore you become an employee. And so if you get bought out, be it from a third party or you sell to insiders, a lot of it's still dependent on you unless it's been passed off. So what do we do about that? Well, let's make a plan and ask some of these questions. We want to do what we're best at. And oftentimes entrepreneurs, they're best at building, starting, ideating, and they're good at a lot of other things, but, keep what you're best at, and then go to the opposite extreme. What can you get rid of? What can you delegate that you just don't like to do, aren't good at, or you can actually easily buy? And then identify whether you have a successor, prioritize what to give up, and start the process. The process might look like this. You create an org chart on the left today with these major rocks. And oftentimes this is what it looks like, is most small businesses, small to mid-sized businesses even, the owner's the CEO, they're the salesperson, they're the operations person, and they are also HR finance. The goal is over here on the right, just become the CEO over time and extract yourself from everything else. Now this org chart can have, what's that?
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious to see what you and Pat are seeing as you work with business owners. But one thing I've noticed from clients, I agree 100% that it used to be, you get a lot of clients who take a lot of pride in the fact that they're the master of every aspect of their business. But I'm curious if you guys are seeing what I'm seeing, which is people are overwhelmed. And I think the pandemic only made it worse.
Yep.
And I've got a lot of clients who 2 years ago loved their business and love what they're doing. And now they're like, I'm ready to make some changes because it's just all my business is all consuming.
Yep.
You guys seeing a lot of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As well as I think the fact that the world went virtual and it worked to a degree, shifted a mindset that it's okay to have a bookkeeper that's not in my office and actually that I've never personally met.
Yeah.
It's okay to do business differently. And I think that was probably the big aha moment in many cases. So there's the fatigue, and then there's also, in a way, the paradigm shift, which has been very helpful. Because we found owners that are actually more willing to do some of these things. And
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So I just pick from the air, take a 5-year horizon, and as best as possible, guess what you'd like it to look like. And you may have different bubbles in your org chart, but the key is not an org chart with people, but an org chart with functions. And then from there, it's make a plan to over time, and notice I just laid out kind of a simple 5-year task list here. What can you do to start with? And note, I've highlighted outsourcing twice. In many ways, we had a conversation with a client the other day that they've been around for a while. They've actually outsourced their accounting, and then some partner said, "Hey, why don't we hire somebody to do it instead?" And that's the worst thing you can do, because if you've got it working and someone else is doing it, guess what? That's not a key person anymore. And instead, boy, a buyer will look at that and go, "Yep, got it. It's rocking. It's probably doing state of the art rather than kind of the way we've always done it." All kinds of benefits. So make a plan to, yeah.
I'd add one other thing, that if you're having a challenge with your outsourced HR folks or your outsourced finance folks, a lot easier to plug and play to replace them than when it's a specific person. When that specific person isn't working out, you might have to let them go. You've got to go through a hiring process, which costs time and money. And in the meantime, you have a gap.
Yes.
And so once you go to this outsourcing, it makes it a lot easier to pivot and shift, downshift, upshift.
Yep.
I'm saying from experience, because we outsource several functions and it's really made a big difference.
Yeah,
Great point.
absolutely. And it provides a buyer an easy option to say, well, if I've already got that function in-house, I don't have to worry about firing somebody. I don't even have to be the bad guy. I'm just going to end the contract, absorb accounting, absorb HR into my existing function, and it's a no-brainer, and it's a non-emotional thing. So a key element here, obviously, that operations and sales, that's the one that takes a lot of time. So even though I have specific bullets there, that's the one that has to be tested. They've got to be mentored. You got to be sure that they're the right people to run it if you're going to pass it off. And that gets back to what Walter was talking about last week, or last time, was just the exit paths. We've had people go down that path and test it, where they thought it was going to be an insider sale. It eventually wound up needing to be a third party because there just wasn't anyone inside that could run it. And it is what it is. So again, if you only got 2 years, that's fine. Take a couple steps. It'll be more sellable. It'll be more valuable than it would be if you hadn't. Processes. Every business has their way of doing it. And I had the joy of being with a startup. You figure it out as you go. And a lot of times you're doing what needs to be done and trying to do it well, and you generally do. But what happens is the evolution over time then is that knowledge resides with the expert on board, and it can be difficult to train if it's in the expert's head, or the expert is required for the machine to run. And there are also lack of efficiencies, and then particularly in today's era, when you have internal HR, for instance, and even internal accounting, if you don't have the breadth of knowledge to keep up with legislative changes, COVID requirements of having people come back to work, what you can do legally, all those things, there's massive risk. And so when it's embodied in the single expert, can be very risky. So what do you do to fix that? Well, you simply identify your processes. Key is identify who owns them. And this is where I say the gears interact. That org chart, should have a process owner there. And that process owner is the person that knows how that part of the machine runs. And the process is embodied in the function, not in the person. And from there, it's just, let's assess the processes, write them down in a simple manner, and then update them periodically, get help where you need. I listed out a handful of typical processes here. Every business is different, but again, start limited, start with the big rocks, capture them simply, and be it a flow chart, be it a step-by-step function. But the key is who owns that, because the buyer coming in is going to want to know that function owns that thing, which says both the org chart is credible as well as it's been well thought through as to how this machine actually needs to run. The customers in the market. Yeah, there's no more buggy whip factories, and there's a reason. And it's an antiquated analogy, but still the truth is technology does advance, desires of clients change, and even our products become antiquated. So here's some of the problem is in this market area. We don't actually know why people buy from us. That seems like it's well, yes, I do. Well, yeah, we did, but do we really know day by day why people are buying from us? And is it because of our price? Is it because of our quality? Is it because of our uniqueness? What are the factors? Because understanding those factors then helps us keep them valuable, which keeps a business sellable. If we miss it, then we can kind of lose sight. The idea of a competitive advantage is what we're talking about here. Have many customers that, boy, they got the big client and they're so excited that they have that huge client that provides them all the revenue. Well, that's wonderful, but that's a major risk. Every sale is a new sale is also a key issue. And then the world changes, constant change is here to stay, and it will change. So what do? Well, you do these things. Assess your value proposition. What is it, and is it still valid? And then start diversifying, seek long-term contracts, subscription revenue, stay aware of the market and know your competition. And I highlighted two things in particular that a buyer will look at. Because a buyer, let's face it, as one of the major gears here is cash flow. And a buyer wants to know that cash flow is sure. They want credibility for the future. So when you walk in and there's customer or a client that has 10% of their business with other customers and 90% with customer A, that's a massive problem if customer A goes away. Vlasic Pickles, classic case. Over 50% of their business wound up being with Walmart. And Walmart eventually said, we're not paying more than X for the product, period. End of discussion. Within 2 years, Vlasic was bankrupt because they just couldn't, they couldn't survive. They weren't diversified. This company, they lose customer A. Yeah, it's a hit, but not that big a deal. So the diversification of revenue and 10% is kind of like the golden rule. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do on a regular basis is, we have a spreadsheet with all of our clients, and I mean, this may seem like a no-brainer, but the first thing you need to do is you should have some overview spreadsheet, however you do it, if you have other technology where you can quickly see how you stand. So if you don't have that, that's the first place you need to start. And then from there, I think you can assess, to your point, how big of a percentage, is our biggest client and all that kind of stuff. But you actually have to have that data. And so, I think it's important. There's baby steps here to be taken.
That's a great point, Lisa. And there is that, even in cases where I was working with a client a couple of days ago, and one of their major revenue categories, there are 3 revenue categories, but one of them is actually a customer. They partner with somebody who feeds them 30% of their revenue. And there's a 30-year personal relationship between the owners, which is wonderful. But as well, partnerships change and partners retire and things happen. And so it's one of those just big boop, boop, boop. Don't count on that for the future, because boy, if that partner goes away, you've got something to solve.
Well, and any buyer is going to want to see your list of customers.
Yes,
And when we acquired another smaller practice, we they wanted to see, we wanted to see demographics because we want to know how old they are. I mean, there's a lot of data that a buyer is going to want to see to assess how strong this client base is.
Yep. Yes, they will. Yes, they will. Yep. And another key issue here is just is recurring revenue. And so there's the holy grail of revenue is subscription revenue that is automated renewal. And it's like on Amazon or whatever, when you sign up for the subscription underneath the on-demand video stuff, before you know it, you're getting charged $10 a month forever and you don't even know it. And that's ideal, but here's the simple picture is a buyer will look and say, when I come in, is every sale a new sale or is there repetitive sale? And so this simple example just shows same revenue, 100% new sales, everyone's a one-off versus 70% recurring. Well, here's the mountain they got to climb is I need to sell $2.3 million a year, or I sell 700K a year of new sales. The 700K is a lot more attractive. So again, anything that lowers that number, that gives some sense of, yep, future revenues won't be that difficult to reach, makes a business far more attractive, thus far more sellable. This goes without saying, cash flow financial controls, and there's so much you could unpack here. So I just wanted to touch on some big mountaintops, and I'll just go to the kind of the pictorial list over here. But precede it with a lot of the problem here when somebody comes to buy or be purchased is an owner doesn't actually understand what the seller's looking for. Most owners, they understand kind of the pulse of their company financially. They've been running it for a long time and they get cash flow to a degree. They're used to looking at the bank account. They got a sense of if the trends are going this way, it's healthy. If the trend's going this way, it's not. But a lot of it is, it's like a process where it's not written down. It's in their head and it's born out of experience. It's born out of knowledge of their industry. It's born out of knowledge of their business. It's not pulled back so any accountant could walk in and say, here's what's happening. But that's exactly what happens when somebody comes to buy. An accountant or an analyst does walk in and say, what's happening? And so in order to get then credibility behind the numbers, here's what's needed. And these are some of the biggies is there an annual budget? And again, it doesn't have to be overly complex, but does a budget exist? And is cash management actually happening? I read a history of Enron, and I hadn't known it, but 3 months before Enron went bankrupt, they got infused with $800 million, which would have actually enabled them to survive. Within 2 weeks, 400 million of it was gone, and the CFO had no idea why. Because spending authority was so spread out that they had no controls over cash. And thus we know the story. Obviously a large company, but at the same time, an owner or a buyer wants to know, is cash actually managed? Do you understand what's happening? And accounting reports don't do that. Accounting reports are they're the gauges, if you will, but they're not actually providing understanding. They're the data which leads to understanding. So there needs to be awareness. Is there a forecast? And we'll touch on that in a minute, but just, are there forecasts that are routinely estimated and updated? Reporting. Is monthly reporting happening? And by reporting, I recognize I am not an accountant. I'm an operations guy. And so for me, accounting reports are not reporting for most owners, because most owners don't actually understand the details and which details to focus in on. So reporting should be, well, do you know what your 5 key metrics are? Are you monitoring those key metrics? Does the data come out the same way? And does it come out all the time, about the same time of the month, in the same format, so there's consistency of understanding? Because if there's not, then the reporting changes and a buyer will look at reports that look differently each time and go, nah, that's just not what I want. They want to see same thing every month. You're on top of it. You understand. And then analysis. We go back to a budget. A budget's just simply an initial. It's a guardrail, if you will. It's a baseline against which to measure. The key issue isn't so much that you're off budget. Let's face it. If you had a budget for X revenue and instead you had X plus Y, well, that's a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. The key is understand why, and then was it as profitable? So the issue is not so much hitting budget. The issue is understanding why you are missing plan or not. Then lastly, do you have plans for growth? And when the day is done, the pictures say it all. Are you flying by the seat of your pants, or is there some type of plan that says this is where we can go? And the key issue here, let's face it, oftentimes owners, they're too busy to do like super detailed strategic planning. And strategic planning can just be overdone in small to mid-sized businesses. But you do want to ask the simple questions of where am I and where do I want to be? And then how do I increase my revenue? And what assets do I need to do it? Document, track, execute, adjust. That, it can be that simple. And a plan as simple as this works. This can take an owner 10 minutes to actually fill out. And the simple basis is, where am I and where do I want to be in 5 years? And the where do I want to be may be the right question. Where can I be in 5 years? Because some people may want to be at 100 million, they can't, but they could be at 14 million. And so look at a realistic annualized growth. How much does it cost you to produce the work? And assume that we're not going to get less efficient. You may get more efficient, but maybe not less. And then what are my key expenses? Key line here is owner compensation, even cleaning up owner compensation, because a lot of times it's murky. There's personal expenses buried in there, all kinds of stuff. When a buyer comes to buy, they're going to want to see cleaner numbers. They're going to want to see that line that shows here's owner comp, which is salary, because then that owner is going to look at that line and says, okay, good, that cost goes away. And that is now my salary as the new owner. And then we just want to identify, what do I need to get there? I need a part-time controller in 2022. I need an ops director in 2023. And I'm going to start spending more on advertising and marketing because I want to up that top line. I do that simple math and I go from 293K in net income to 1.7 million in net income. And that's just consciously thinking, how do I get more efficient? How do I increase my revenue? A simple forecast like that, Lisa, one second. Simple forecast like that can prove to a buyer that you actually know how to plan and you actually know how to hit your plan. And if you can plan and hit your plan, guess what? Your projections have a lot more credibility. So yes, Lisa.
Yeah, and when we're on the other side and you're trying to do your personal financial plan, this whole owner's comp thing is critical, because it's often the first look at, well, how much money are you going to need to live on, when you're not part of the business. So it's and that cleaning up piece of what's the business paying for? What are you paying for? What are you going to have to pay for on the other side of an exit is just an absolutely critical element in doing the personal planning that brings us back to then working with you and Walter around, what's the number we need and how are we going to get there? Can we get there? That whole conversation.
Yep. Well said. Well said. Yep, man. And actually, the fact that he just jumped on, one of the guys that really got me thinking about this was a gentleman named Taylor Devine. And, is a company valuable or is a company sellable? And it's worth what a buyer will pay for it. So next steps then, planning for the future is like a journey. And So in another life, I used to navigate Navy ships, and I would make plans to sail from San Francisco to the Indian Ocean, and I'd sit in the harbor of San Francisco in my chart room, and I'd lay out the charts, and then we'd go. And there was a defined course and a defined timeline, but stuff happens. And so it is as simple in this as is, where are you? Where do you want to be? You identify weakness, prioritize problems, make a plan, execute. And then we just recommend 90-day sprints with no more than 3 actions. You know, eat the elephant, you know, a couple bites at a time. And it's okay if those 3-month sprints carry over into 6, because the goal here is improvement. There's not a perfect company. There just never will be, because as soon as it gets perfect, the environment will change, you know, but progress towards sellability is key. And then realistic awareness of how sellable it is key. So that when the day is done, you know, and we've had these conversations and in a way broken the bad news to people, and a client that Taylor and I worked on together, it was kind of that disappointing, you know what, guys, it just isn't what you hope. And so you've got to make another plan, but better have that than just keep driving with your eyes closed. And so that results in the optimally most enjoyable and successful exit you could have. So yeah, with that, I'll stop. Other questions, thoughts?
That was well done, Corby. Thank you.
No, thank you, Walter.
There was a
So-
lot of good stuff.
And, you know, I think it's important to remember this is an iterative process. You know, a lot of times people think, to your point, Corby, you know, I'm going to make a plan and I'm good and that's it. And I don't need to talk to anybody. I'm just going to stay on course and do it. And, you know, what we know on the personal financial planning side of things is there's going to be course corrections. There's going to be new challenges. You know, we're having to factor in inflation, rates of returns, all kinds of variables. We can only lock so many of the variables down. And so you've got to keep looking at this. And to your point, you got to keep looking at the progress you're making, you know, the financials, the whole, it's a process, it's a journey. It's not, you know, eventually there's a destination, but there's a lot of journey on the way there that I'm not sure everybody always appreciates. You want it to be simple. You don't want to have to worry about it. And yet it is something where you've got to continually fine tune.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you think of team, even, we focused in on the internal team and building the internal team, and again, that's build it as much as you can. But there is also the external team, and you know, nobody has the corner on knowledge, and because it is so complex, just having the right people either on the bench or on the field with you at the right time is really key.
Yep, and I would add that when they're coordinating well together and communicating as a team with you, the business owner, you can get some really fantastic ideas and planning that comes out of that. And you know, when folks aren't coordinating, that's when there's often missed opportunities or confusing advice and such. And so we think that's really important as well. Anything else you want to say, Walter? Because I'll set up the next steps here, and then we can see if anybody's got any lingering questions.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add to the conversation that you and Corby were just having involving or discussing outward or outside resources. I don't know if you guys have had this experience, but clients of mine who belong to business groups like Vistage or some other types of groups, they are always the ones, and maybe it's the personality that got them to join those groups, but they seem to be the ones most willing to make changes and you know, things like that. I think hearing from other people who maybe have done these things and it's how it's worked out encourages them to do it.
Yep. Coachable is a really important element of a successful exit, if you're not coachable, you're probably going to have a really hard time
Yeah.
getting what you want or need from your exit.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Walter, it's like a lot of problem solving, starting to talk about it with somebody that has wisdom is the great place to start. Just this opening up the dialogue has its own benefit, because eventually then you will talk to the people that are going to be helpful. But if you never talk, you're kind of stuck in your own bubble. And
So I'd like to ask these two questions and actually open it up to get your feedback right now. And for those of you who are going to be watching the recording, encourage you to maybe, even email us and let us know, because we'd appreciate the feedback. Number one, what's the most important thing that you've picked up or learned from this series? And even more importantly, what's your most important next step? So, Kelly, I'll start with you. I'm curious, maybe what the biggest aha you got, and maybe what you're going to do next.
Let me ask a question about this particular item in the series. I'm just curious. A lot of what we just talked about was, the operations of your business, getting it ready to sell. But we touched a little bit in the beginning about, I can't remember how it was laid out, but whether it's sellable or not. What examples have you run into of legally how you might walk into a business and they'll be like, I'm ready to sell it. You'd be like, okay, well, you're a C Corp and you can't sell it. So first we got to I'm making that up. I'm no attorney and I don't know tax accounting, but certainly there are times when like your business might not be able to be sold because you've got to first consult an attorney to reframe it. I'm curious how often you run into that, and if there are common things that maybe happen. I know I've run into a couple clients where there are a capitalization table of who owned the business. I'm like, do you guys realize what you did? You gave this person X%, and let's try to negotiate getting them off the cap table before you go sell it. I don't know. Do you have any examples?
I bet Walter does.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're kind of stuck with whatever entity you're in, and there are workarounds depending on the entity to still come out with a good outcome. One situation, Corby, Pat, and I are working on right now. It's a company that it's two related companies, same owners, and we're trying to figure out maybe they want to keep one and not the other. So that comes up sometimes. And sometimes what you'll see is within one business entity, there's maybe 2 or 3 distinct lines of business. Some may be more valuable than others. Working with a client right now who has 2 lines of business. One is healthcare consulting, which is extremely hot right now. So they'd like to spin that off and sell that separately. And there's tax-free ways to do that. So we do see some reorganization type of transitions prior to a sale. And certainly what you mentioned is, it's the classic where some guy thought his secretary was great, so he gave her 1% of the company, 20 years ago. And she no longer even works there, but she still owns this 1%. That kind of stuff is a total nightmare. So it's really important that the seller does their own pre-sale due diligence on legal issues, because you don't want that to come up at the last minute. That is a total nightmare. So it's kind of like the whole process in general. The earlier you start looking at these things, the easier it is to resolve them.
And doesn't a C to S Corp transition take some time? I mean, that's not a quick conversion necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, the conversion itself is quick, but you don't realize the tax benefits until 5 years after. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
And I was going to say I think the key principle there is it's the clarity of what is being sold and who owns it. Again, we were working with a client a couple months ago where there's a corporation that has 4 related nonprofits, but their finances they're not as, the way they've managed it, I don't think there's any lack of integrity. But on the other hand, it hasn't been as well documented as it could have been. And who actually owns what, according to bylaws, as well as according to partnership agreements, just isn't clear, because they started it, they evolved something, and this works pretty good. But when you come down to buy it, you want to know exactly what you're buying. And yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Kelly, you want to answer the second question?
Yeah, so what was my favorite part about this? I don't know. There were so many awesome nuggets in here. You know, I'm more of a back office person. You know, I'm an accountant, I'm a CFO person. So, you know, sometimes I was like, yeah, I'm even probably, you could see me like nodding my head, like, I know you can't be the everything of everything. That's not a sellable company, but there's always a couple nuggets in here that even I take out of. And so I take out more of the nuggets of how you've, you know, got to make your product amazing, and you got to make your company attractive to other people. You know, forget cleaning up the back office. Like, you got to make sure you got something that's worth a darn. And, you know, maybe it's just not as valuable as you think it is. So just constantly hearing that is helpful. But, you know, overall, just what a rich bit of content across all these series, with each of you each of your individual expertise kind of chiming in. I think this is just really awesome what you've done for this audience. And I hope lots of people are watching these things for months to come, because there's lots of great nuggets in here. So thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Jeff, I don't know if you're with us and can talk. I'm just curious, any big ahas you've gotten, and maybe what your most important next step is.
Yeah, I'd echo what others have said, Lisa. Number one, Corby and Walter, having been listened on most of these webinars and sessions, they've been both fantastic. I think overall, and Lisa, you know, you'll understand this comment, a lot of this is reminding us what we often know as business owners that we need to be doing. But as Kelly said, there's a lot of great nuggets in there. I mean, the one I wrote down here, I think probably the most important thing is that realistic look in the mirror, whether it's what's your client base, what's your next step, where are you in this process? I recognize a lot of stuff that both of you gentlemen laid out is optimal to take on. But the reality as business owners is sometimes you can only bite, like you say, you can only bite at the elephant one bite at a time. Yep. With all of that. And then one of you mentioned this, which is a lot of what's in here for any of us as business owners is what sort of that pre-sell or ongoing due diligence of your own business, you know, for how you look transparently and honestly to others. So I think that's the probably the biggest takeaways I got from this. And then most important next step is going back through some of this, Lisa, and applying it, as you know.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And for those who are here and then those listening later, we know that, you know, every business is different. Where you are in the journey are different places. And so what we'd like to offer is for you to reach out to any one of us. As we wrap up things, we'll have everybody's email, you know, we'll send a follow-up email, we'll have this recording, and we welcome your individual questions and are willing to give you 30 minutes of our time to talk through where you are, maybe some of the questions that came out of the various sessions for you and your business, and see if we can help you start moving along with your process. So that'll be our offer to you. We appreciate the time that you've put in to be part of the series. Your questions have been really helpful. The engagement is always very helpful. And with that, anything else from you, Corby or Walter?
No, thank you for you are the brains behind it. So thanks for your leadership. Appreciate it, Lisa.
Yes, Lisa, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for attending.
Great being with you all.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
We'll send the follow-up out in the next few days.
Great. Thanks very much, Lisa, and everybody.
All right, take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye.
Bye now.